Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today we're in our group learning program and we're studying chapter 24, which is titled Misunderstandings of Gotama Buddhist Teachings. We use this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, as our foundational text for this program. And we go chapter by chapter each Sunday to help you learn what's in the chapter. And if you're reading the chapter before class and after class, or after class, then it's going to help you to be able to learn foundational teachings that you need to make your way to enlightenment. Over the last 6.5 months, I've been sharing with students how to get to enlightenment based on the words of the Buddha and making that very clear, using his teachings and guiding students both in class and outside of class, helping them to understand this path to enlightenment. And then here, the very last chapter of the book, chapter 24, I share misunderstandings of Gotama Buddhist teachings. This is one of the ways to help you be able to see the path to enlightenment very clearly. Because during the 6.5-month program, I've been sharing what are the teachings that lead to enlightenment in using the words of the Buddha. Well, now I'm going to share with you some misunderstandings that you're going to see in the world, because as you go around to various temples perhaps, or you're involved in various conversations, or you might be deciding to read various books, there's going to be certain misunderstandings that you see because the average person isn't actually learning with the words of the Buddha. While you've been learning with me, you are learning with the words of the Buddha in resources that are based on the original words of the Buddha. But it's very rare for somebody who even considers themselves to be Buddhist or have been studying the Buddhist teachings for 10, 20, 30 years even, to be studying with the original words of the Buddha. So as you go into various venues, as you talk to various people, as you pick up various books from different authors, you're most likely going to see things that are in conflict with what I've shared with you over the last 6.5 months of these foundational teachings, using the words of the Buddha, because other teachers, other practitioners aren't necessarily using the words of the Buddha. So I'm going to share with you some of the common misunderstandings that you're going to see as a way to help you more clearly be able to see the path to enlightenment and understand these misunderstandings that you'll see in the world. As we go in today's class, you're welcome to ask any and all questions that you like by either putting that into the comment section of Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So I'd like to welcome all of you to today's class and invite you to learn and ask questions about anything and everything that you might be interested to understand as part of today's class. So to get us started on understanding the misunderstandings of Gotama Buddhist teachings, it's first important to give you just a brief little history and understanding of the landscape of Gotama Buddhist teachings in the world. This will help you to understand why we have the misunderstandings that we do in the world. During the lifetime of Gotama Buddha, of course, he shared his teachings. He shared what it took to get to enlightenment. He was the Buddha. His students were there learning with him in an oral tradition. He spoke and they remembered his teachings. They committed those to memory through using chanting. There was nothing written down during his lifetime. It wasn't until after he died that his teachings were actually written down. And now, today, we have 3 different primary schools or traditions of Buddhist teachings that consider what they're teaching to be the Buddhist teachings. There's the first one, which is called Theravada Buddhism. This means teachings of the elders. That word Theravada means teachings of the elders. And the reason why it's labeled as Theravada Buddhism, or some people refer to it even as early Buddhism, is because the teachings in this school or this tradition base what they share on the Pali Canon, which is the original source teachings of the Buddha. This is the largest, most complete collection of teachings of the Buddha. In this particular tradition, feels that it's unwise to make any changes to his teachings, that the Buddha is the one who's the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment, and it would be unwise to make any changes to his teachings because the Buddha himself during his lifetime talks about how it would be unwise to make any changes to his teachings. You'll see this tradition primarily hosted in places like Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, even southern Vietnam has a lot of this style and this tradition of Buddhist teachings. And in reality, this has been spread all throughout the world. You'll find this even in North America, South America, Europe, and other parts of the world. But this tradition of Buddhist teachings is considered to be the closest form of teachings that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha, because the largest, most complete collection of teachings of the Buddha is the Pali Canon, and this tradition of Buddhist teachings considers that to be the original source. Some people refer to this tradition in a derogatory way. They use the term lesser vehicle or Hinayana Buddhism. These ways of referring to Theravada Buddhism is meant to be derogatory and demeaning towards the people in this tradition. And it's unwise to use those types of ways to refer to this tradition of Buddhist teachings. Instead, it would be wiser to use Theravada Buddhism. Then, after the death of the Buddha, about 500 to 1,000 years later, there's another tradition that spawns, and this becomes known as Mahayana Buddhism. This tradition of Buddhist teachings are found mostly in East Asia, which is China. So this is the form of Buddhism that you'll find there. And things change by the time Mahayana Buddhism is created. There's various rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship that are included. There's various thoughts of how one thinks about themselves, as once you get to enlightenment, people think of you as a Buddha, or that you have Buddhahood, or that you have Buddha nature. And oftentimes what you see is people referring to this as the greater vehicle, and that somehow it's going to help you get to enlightenment more quickly. But this isn't actually true, but this is the way that some people will refer to it. Then there's a tradition called Vajrayana Buddhism. This is oftentimes found in Tibet, Bhutan, Mongolia, and the Russian Republic of Kalmykia. And this is sometimes referred to as the lightning fast vehicle. And again, this is just a misunderstanding of the teachings. If we're referring to things as a lesser vehicle, greater vehicle, and lightning fast vehicle, then we're misunderstanding what it really needs to happen in order to get to enlightenment, that it's a gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. If you're trying to hurry up and get to enlightenment, then you're misunderstanding what you really should be doing, which is gradually training the mind. If you're rushing around to do things, this isn't what an enlightened being is going to experience and what an enlightened being is going to do. In this tradition of Vajrayana Buddhism, which spawns about a good 1,000 years after the death of the Buddha, there's lots of rites and rituals, ceremonies and worship. There's prayer. Some people in these other traditions of Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism might even refer to the Buddha as a god or something like this, or some kind of deity. And what these other traditions are teaching isn't going to necessarily lead to the enlightened mental state based on what the Buddha shared and based on what we know, because the Buddha shares that if people change his teachings, that this would be to the detriment of that individual and many, many countless people as well. So while we have these three different traditions, and there's various offshoots of all these different traditions, in my opinion, there's only one Buddhism, because there was only one Buddha. There couldn't be, 100 or 200 different Buddhist teachings, because there was only one Buddha. And I don't necessarily label what I teach in any one of these particular ways. I consider what I share to be the words of the Buddha, the path to enlightenment, this path that the Buddha discovered and declared. And you can see the truth for yourself, that through learning, through reflecting on those teachings and practicing them, that they lead to the enlightened mental state. But most people would probably classify what I share as being the Theravada teachings, because it's the original teachings that go back to the original source teachings of the Buddha, which is the Pali Canon. But I don't necessarily suggest that anybody adopt any of these labels as being who they are or what they are, because as part of practicing the universal truth of non-self, you're looking to get rid of all of those things. You're not looking to adopt any kind of identity. So while we have these different schools and these different offshoots of all these different schools, you're going to find that there's really only one path to enlightenment as taught by the Buddha, which is in his original words. And by studying with the original words of the Buddha, then you'll be able to know what he did teach and what he didn't teach. So you would think that everybody in the world who considers themselves Buddhist, that they would be learning with the original words of the Buddha. But unfortunately, this isn't true in the world, because the original source teachings of the Buddha in the Pali Canon are in 45 large volumes that are about 6 inches thick or 10 centimeters thick. If everybody had access to this, that would be wonderful, that everybody would be able to then learn and practice based on the original words of the Buddha. But because it's so expensive to print out, the vast majority of the world doesn't have access to these teachings. In fact, here in Thailand, it's about 3 months of your salary to be able to purchase a set of these books. So the average person doesn't have access to these, even the average temple. So there's probably no book collection that you have that's worth 3 months of your salary. So the same thing happens here in Thailand and other places, that not overtly or intentionally, but these teachings have been hidden for a very long period of time because the average person can't get access to them in printed form. So one of the things that I've done in this book series is consolidated the teachings into smaller volumes that consolidates the teachings and allows you to digest it in smaller chunks, and then I make them available to you for free through downloading on the internet, which wasn't available, several years ago, or certainly wasn't available after the death of the Buddha. So now we have technology, we have the ability to make the teachings available at no cost through downloading files, through allowing people to go print that, or if they order the books online through something like Amazon, which all the books that I share are available there, they're at a much reduced cost because they've been consolidated in such a form that they're not 45 large volumes that would cost 3 months of somebody's salary. Instead, it's a much smaller amount to be able to purchase printed books that encompass the teachings of the Buddha. So the reason why these different traditions spawned is because during the lifetime of the Buddha, not everybody was enlightened. There was a core group of people who were enlightened and knew what it took to get to enlightenment. And they went to actually preserve the teachings in written format so that people could learn those teachings many generations later. And one of the qualities of mind of an enlightened being is they have focus, concentration, clarity of mind, and deep memory. Once you get to enlightenment, you won't forget the teachings that led to your enlightenment. You'll be practicing them deeply, and you would have deeply learned them and been deeply practicing them. So by the time somebody gets to enlightenment, they won't forget what actually led to their enlightenment. So this is why people were able to write the teachings down immediately after his death. Within a few months, they started working on that. But the vast majority of the people that are learning today are learning through an oral tradition. They're not actually learning from the original books, because while there was a core group of people who had gotten to enlightenment during the lifetime of the Buddha and were interested in preserving those teachings, there were other people, lots and lots and lots of people on the fringes who weren't necessarily practicing the teachings of the Buddha very closely, and they perhaps still had ego or conceit in their mind and went off and created their own communities, which ultimately spawned into what we now call Mahayana or Vajrayana Buddhism. And these things spawned, and the further you get away from the focal point of where the Buddha lived and where he taught, the further away you get from the teachings. So nowadays, I've been to about 200 temples or more, and I've only ever been to one that actually teaches with the words of the Buddha. So that's less than 1% of the temples that I've been to. And I haven't been to all the temples, of course. So when you get out on Facebook, when you read books, when you read things about Buddhism, oftentimes you're seeing a lot of misunderstandings, and those misunderstandings can confuse somebody. So today's class, we're going to go through 9 of the common misunderstandings that you'll see in the world as a way to help you to be able to then see the path to enlightenment more clearly. But before we move on into that content, I would like to just pause here and see if you guys have any questions on kind of a brief little historical understanding of where we are in terms of the teachings of the Buddha. You can ask those questions through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom by putting it into the comment section, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here, so I'm just going to continue on in our class, and then feel free to ask questions as we go. I'll be pausing at the end of each of the 3 misunderstandings. There's 9 of them, and I'll do them in 3 at a time and then pause at the end of each one. So this first one that we'll talk about, which the majority of these misunderstandings that I'm sharing with you are the ones that are in the Theravada tradition. The Mahayana tradition and Vajrayana tradition are really far away from what the Buddha taught, that if I went through all the individual misunderstandings, it would take quite a while. It would probably take a multi-volume book set to be able to explain all the different misunderstandings. So since people are learning with the Pali Canon, and you can see the Pali Canon and understand it, what I decided to do in this particular chapter is mostly focus on the misunderstandings from the Theravada tradition. But we'll talk about other misunderstandings from other traditions too, just briefly here and there. But the reason why I'm sharing these is because if you're learning the teachings of the Buddha and you walk into a temple that is a Theravada temple, you'll see some of these things and you can understand that they're misunderstandings. So this first one in Thai we call Gwat Nam. This might be referred to as pouring water ceremony. Well, as soon as you see a rite, ritual, ceremony, or worship, or any kind of prayer associated with Gotama Buddha or any kind of spirit worship or anything like this, right away you know that the Buddha didn't teach that, because everything that he taught comes back to cultivating the mind and training the mind through acquiring wisdom and training the mind through that wisdom through things like meditation and all the other steps on the Eightfold Path. So this particular ceremony, right away, you can know that if there's a rite, ritual, ceremony, or worship, that it's not something that the Buddha taught. But these things were carried forward from other traditions and mixed and blended in places like here in Thailand and other places. What the thought is with this particular ceremony is that people teach that if you provide a gift to an ordained practitioner or a teacher or a temple in order to create merit, that then there's this little ceremony where you pour this water out into this urn, and this is going to transfer the benefits of you practicing merit to somebody else. And typically people are thinking that they're transferring their merit to a dead relative. Well, if you understand the practice of generosity and why Gautama Buddha taught generosity, which is essentially leading to merit, then you understand that it's not possible for you to transfer those benefits. Because when you're practicing generosity, which is giving and sharing more than is strictly required without any expectation of anything in return, and then you're doing that in the direction of perhaps helping a temple or helping ordained practitioners or helping a teacher to share their teachings, the benefit that is experienced by the individual who's making the offering is that you're working on eliminating craving, desire, attachment, the mental longing, strong eagerness, the mind holding on and being selfish. So by you practicing generosity of giving and sharing, you're reducing your craving, desire, attachment in the mind. And there's no way for you to be able to transfer that to another person. And if you think back to chapter 9, when I taught the natural law of Gama, using the words of the Buddha, where the Buddha says, any Gama that you create, either wholesome or unwholesome, you are its heirs, meaning you are going to experience that wholesome or unwholesome Gama. It's not possible to transfer your Gama to another individual. So when you're practicing generosity and producing merit, you're generating wholesome Gama, but that wholesome Gama or that wholesome result is that you're reducing craving, desire, attachment. There's no way for you to transfer that to anybody else whatsoever. So even though you might see this happening at various temples or various venues that are sharing teachings of the Buddha, it's not something from the Buddha himself. Same thing with this second misunderstanding, which in Thai we call Namon. Namon might be translated into what we would say blessed water. What this is where an ordained practitioner will take a pot of water, and during some kind of event, they will light a candle and they'll drip wax into this pot of water. And then after the chanting and the wax dripping into the water, they'll consider it blessed water. And then they'll take this device that kind of looks like the end of a broom, they'll dip it in the water, and then they will sprinkle it around on the people who are there at the event. And it's thought that when this water touches you, it's a purification. But if you understand the original words of the Buddha and what you're doing on the path to enlightenment, this isn't possible. That you can't sprinkle water on somebody and create some kind of benefit other than you get a refreshing, blast of water. You maybe get a little bit of cleanliness on your face and your hair. Maybe you get cooled down a little bit, but there's no benefit to the mind itself. That in order to get to enlightenment, you need to train the mind through the Eightfold Path. The Buddha actually shares in his own words very directly about this blessed water ceremony because it was being done during his lifetime as well. And he says very clearly that he refrains from doing this, and he guides his students to also refrain from doing this as well. But because we're so far away from the death of the Buddha, 2,500 years, and people have mainly relied on this oral tradition and handing down things from person to person to person, and the vast majority of people aren't learning what the original words of the Buddha, we see certain people, even ordained practitioners in temples and monks, people like this, that they're actually doing this type of thing. And it's unfortunate because it's leading people away from establishing right view and understanding things like dependent origination, which is not a teaching that I shared in this particular program. But if you move on to the Pali Canon and English study group, you'll learn about dependent origination, where it makes it very clear for you what the real problem is in the unenlightened mind, which is that unknowing of true reality, or the ignorance, which we talked about in chapter 8 as part of the three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots, or the three fires of craving, anger, and ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality. That's the real problem in the unenlightened mind, and the way to antidote that is wisdom. And you can't get to wisdom through sprinkling water on you or having somebody sprinkle water on you. This isn't a way that's going to actually lead to one's enlightenment, and it promotes wrong view, because when you have right view, you understand what the real problem is in the unenlightened mind, which is craving, desire, attachment, and that's what's leading to discontent feelings. And there's no way that a sprinkling of water is going to help you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So you'll see these two things, and you'll also see this third one as well, which in Thai we call Sai Sin, or in English you might refer to it as sacred thread. Sometimes when you go visit a certain teacher or ordained practitioner at a temple, as you have a talk with this person, you might make an offering, they have you do Gotama, they sprinkle some water on you, and then at the end of this, they will tie this string on your wrist, sometimes white, sometimes a colored string like you see in the picture here. And this colored string being tied on the wrist, again, it's thought that this is some kind of special sacred thread that's going to somehow benefit you. But this isn't possible. It's not something that's going to promote wisdom in the mind, and it leads to wrong view. That if an individual thinks that I can just show up to a temple, I can make an offering, I can pour out this water, I can get water sprinkled on me, and I can get a rope tied on my wrist, and now I can transfer my good deeds to my dead relatives, this promotes wrong view in the mind of what you're really trying to accomplish on this goal, which is acquiring wisdom to train the mind so that you can eliminate the 10 fetters, those 10 individual pollutions or defilements or taints, and those bubble up to the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots. So if one is participating in these things, they're not even able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, because the first stage of enlightenment, one of the fetters there is wrong observances and also wrong behaviors. Wrong behaviors is associated with moral conduct that is described in the Eightfold Path, but the wrong observances are things like rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. Things like this were occurring during the lifetime of the Buddha, and he realized that they don't lead to enlightenment, because the general population was taught and convinced that the way to get to a better life is to go to these special people called Brahmin, that you would then pay them a certain fee and they would pray on your behalf, and you would go home and your life was supposed to get better because they prayed for you. And this bred corruption, because it was only this special group of people that were able to do prayer, and the common person wasn't able to do prayer. So they were taught prior to the Buddha that if you showed up to this person and you paid them money, that they were the only ones that could pray and help you improve your life. So maybe one day you showed up and it was $5, and the next day you show up and it's $10, and there's no recourse. There's no way for you to do anything differently, because the way that people were taught and the way that they believed is that they weren't able to communicate with God and have prayer. So people were kind of stuck. And what the Buddha realized is that it's not that you need to pray to God and pay these people money to improve your life, but instead you need to learn wisdom to train your mind and understand and awaken to the natural laws of existence, namely the natural law of Gotama. So in order to get to enlightenment, one needs to cultivate the mind to get to wisdom, and none of these ceremonies, whether it's Guatnam, Namon, or Saisen, are going to be able to produce that for an individual. But you will see these things quite readily in a lot of temples throughout the world, including here in Thailand. So let me see if you guys have any questions on any of these that you would like clarification on. Again, you can ask questions by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions or follow-up questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so let's move on to the next three that I can share with you some additional misunderstandings that you're going to see here as you travel throughout the Buddhist world, or you interact with Buddhist practitioners, or you might pick up books or things like this. The fourth one that I share in the book is really for ordained practitioners, because there's some ordained practitioners who choose to learn with me, and it was important for me to include this one in there for them, but it can also benefit household practitioners to understand this as well. One of the things that ordained practitioners are taught is sometimes ordained practitioners are taught that they are higher than household practitioners, that household practitioners are below them. Some people are even taught that it's only ordained practitioners that can get to enlightenment. Well, all individuals can get to enlightenment, ordained practitioners and household practitioners. It just depends on the lifestyle that you're leading and how you learn to cultivate wisdom, that you can train your mind to get to enlightenment from a household lifestyle or ordained practitioner lifestyle. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he referred to male ordained practitioners as bhikkhus and females as bhikkhunis. Today, people might just refer to them as monks or nuns, but those words sometimes have meaning in other traditions that are sometimes might be confusing for people. So I just refer to everybody that is ordained as an ordained practitioner and household practitioners as household practitioners, because it's just describing the lifestyle that one is leading. And leading a particular type of lifestyle isn't going to determine whether you get to enlightenment or not. Living an ordained lifestyle, it's like living in the womb of a woman. The womb of a woman is the ideal conditions for a fetus to grow and develop into an actual being. So this womb is created so that the fetus can have the ideal conditions in which to grow and develop. Well, living in a monastery and living amongst ordained practitioners is similar to that. It's the ideal conditions for somebody to be able to get to enlightenment. It's more conducive to somebody getting to enlightenment. But as an ordained practitioner, you still have certain challenges and certain goals, the things that you need to overcome, certain wisdom that you need to cultivate in order to get to enlightenment. Just because somebody is ordained doesn't mean that they're enlightened, or that they're going to get enlightened, or that they're even studying the teachings of the Buddha. Some ordained practitioners ordain and they're not even studying the teachings of the Buddha. So just because someone's ordained doesn't necessarily classify them as a better person or a higher person. It's just a lifestyle that they're choosing, and they have access to resources that the average person may not have access to. And they have a lot of time because they're not having to take care of a house or a car. They're not having intimate relationships with life partners. They're not attending to their children. They're supposed to be spending the vast majority of their time learning and practicing the teachings, so that then ultimately they can share the teachings with others and help them get to enlightenment. And then in the household life, we can also get to enlightenment too. We just have other challenges and other obstacles that we need to overcome that are unique and different than the ordained practitioners. So from either one of these lifestyles, one can get to enlightenment. And part of getting to enlightenment is to eliminate what we call conceit or arrogance or pride, or measuring and comparing, judging people and putting yourself above or below others. So as an ordained practitioner, if one is taught that they are higher than the household practitioners, this is going to breed conceit in one's mind. And oftentimes what ordained practitioners are taught is they're taught that when a household practitioner wise them or shows respect to them, that they should not show respect back through a why. And this is sometimes something that is taught. And this is where it can help you as a household practitioner, that as you go around ordained practitioners and you show respect and you why to them, just be understanding that they may not why you back. And that's not a reflection of you or anything that you've done. It's just that that's what they're being taught. And that's unfortunate, because that would hinder them from getting to enlightenment if they thought that they were higher than somebody else and they were putting themselves above people. But if you're showing respect to somebody and you're whying somebody, this should be based on your interest to practice the teachings, not because you expect somebody to do something back to you. So I am around ordained practitioners frequently, and I will why to them and show respect to them, and I have no expectation that they will why me back. In fact, I pretty much know that they're not. But there's a rare occasion where somebody might bow their head or they might actually why to me, but it's very, 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 very rare that you'll actually see this amongst ordained practitioners. And the reason why is because they're taught that they're higher than other people. And this is because the people they're learning from aren't understanding the fetter of conceit, and that this needs to be eliminated from the mind in order to get to enlightenment. So if ordained practitioners continue to practice this way, they will hinder their own ability to get to enlightenment. And I have some words of the Buddha here to share with you to be able to see this for yourself and see the truth about this, so that you don't need to believe me, that you can see the truth for yourself about the Buddha taught to be humble. Where today people are putting ordained practitioners up really high. If you look at the words of the Buddha, which I don't have those specific words here, but there's a place in his teachings where he talks about the ordained practitioners as being the lowest level of livelihood and lifestyle in the world. So here, these words of the Buddha that I'm sharing with you is to help you see how challenging it is to get to enlightenment if you allow conceit to enter into the mind and obsess the mind. So using the words of the Buddha, this is titled, "Gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle even for an arahant." An arahant is an enlightened being. This is how we refer to an enlightened being. An arahant is an individual who's eliminated all 10 fetters of the mind, and now the mind is experiencing enlightenment. And we refer to this being as an arahant, or in English, we might just say enlightened being. So here, the Buddha teaches, monks, gain, honor, and praise, I say, are an obstacle even for a monk who is an arahant, one with taints destroyed. So the Buddha is saying for an enlightened being that gain, honor, and praise, somebody showing you gain, someone showing you honor, someone showing you praise, is an obstacle even for a monk who is an arahant, one with taints destroyed. So now we hear from one of his students. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda asked the master teacher Gotama, "Why, Venerable Sir, are gain, honor, and praise an obstacle even for a monk with taints destroyed?" So Ananda is one of the Buddha's closest students, and he's rightly asking this question, like, hold on a second. If somebody's enlightened, if they're an arahant, if they've eliminated conceit, why is gain, honor, and praise an obstacle for them? They're already enlightened. This shouldn't be an obstacle for them. So Ananda's a little bit confused, so he asks for clarification from his teacher, Gotama Buddha. So now Gotama Buddha comes back in and clarifies for Ananda. He says, I do not say, Ananda, that gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle to his unshakable liberation of mind. So here the Buddha is saying, well, once somebody's enlightened, gain, honor, and praise isn't an obstacle for their enlightenment, for their liberation of mind, for their unshakable and steady mind. It's no longer an obstacle for them. Right? He says, I do not say that gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle to his unshakable liberation of mind, but I say they are an obstacle to his attainment of those peaceful dwellings in this very life, which are achieved by one who resides diligent, dedicated, and determined. So he's saying that this gain, honor, and praise is an obstacle for the attainment of enlightenment. Once your mind's enlightened, gain, honor, and praise are no longer an obstacle. But in order to get to enlightenment, it is a real obstacle, because as your mind experiences people providing you with gain or honor or praise, you might have conceit that comes out in the mind. You might have certain ego that arises, certain boastfulness and arrogance that arises in the mind. So the Buddha is explaining that this is an obstacle for somebody who's working their way to enlightenment. And then he gives guidance of what one should essentially work towards. He says, so dreadful, Ananda, are gain, honor, and praise, so bitter, vile, obstructive, to the achieving of unsurpassed security from bondage, which is enlightenment. Therefore, Ananda, you should train yourselves thus. We will abandon the arisen gain, honor, and praise, and we will not let the arisen gain, honor, and praise persist, obsessing our mind. Thus should you train yourselves. So he's explaining to not allow this gain, honor, and praise to obsess your mind. So this can really help you in life, that when people are complimenting you and telling you all these wonderful, great things about you, don't allow that to obsess your mind. Don't become boastful. Don't become arrogant or prideful. As you get more and more enlightened, people are going to praise you even more. People are going to tell you how kind you are, how friendly you are. People are going to tell you how wise you are, how calm you are, all these different things that you're going to hear. And as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, those qualities of enlightenment are going to be shining forth more and more, and people are going to be seeing that. So as you start experiencing that, don't allow these compliments and this praise or this honor or respect that people are giving you to obsess the mind, because that's going to inhibit you from getting to full liberation where the mind's actually enlightened. And for ordained practitioners, since that's the topic we're talking about here, is just by you becoming ordained, you shouldn't allow that gain, honor, and praise that people show to you for the sake of you choosing to ordain. You shouldn't allow that to obsess your mind. You shouldn't allow other people who are praising you to then affect your mind where you become boastful or arrogant or thinking that you're above people. As an ordained practitioner, as a teacher, I'm not ordained, but I'm a teacher, and people tend to make offerings and donations to me occasionally, and to be able to support and help me to sustain my life and to share these teachings. I have an enormous amount of respect for anybody who chooses to share a bit of their income or a bit of their resources with me to then be able to share these teachings with others. And with an ordained practitioner, they're exclusively living off of the support of household practitioners. So in my opinion, an ordained practitioner or a teacher who's living off donations from their students should have an enormous amount of respect and gratitude for those offerings that are coming to us. So if an ordained practitioner chose not to respect or not to respect household practitioners, they might see that their support goes down and down and down in their temple, and doesn't have the resources that they need to maybe sustain the temple. Or they might see that they don't have as many offerings to sustain their life because they haven't been showing respect and gratitude to their community. And one of the ways we show respect and gratitude is not just through a why, but what we should be doing is offering teachings to our community and to our students. And by giving the teachings back to our community, then our students are able to benefit from those teachings, and then they'll be more interested to share offerings with us. This is the mutual support that the Buddha put in place. So as part of that, there needs to be mutual respect and mutual gratitude in both directions. So I encourage anybody who's ordained, who's learning with me, to keep that in mind as you're learning and practicing the teachings. Even though you might be taught that you're above other people, here you see the words of the Buddha, that he's saying, no, don't let this gain, honor, and praise obsess your mind. And there's other teachings, as I shared, that I can share with ordained practitioners when they request it, or they can look in the book series that I share, where the Buddha says that the ordained path is actually the lowest form of livelihood that exists. Even though today there's been people who put ordained practitioners up high, it's important to remain humble when you're interacting with anybody and everybody, and train the mind to always be humble. Here's another teaching from the words of the Buddha that will help us to understand this humbleness and the real goal of what he set out in terms of the path to enlightenment. This is titled, "This spiritual life is not lived for the sake of deceiving people." His words are, "Monks, this spiritual life is not lived for the sake of deceiving people or persuading them, nor for the benefit of gain, honor, and praise, nor for the benefit of winning in debates, nor with the thought, let the people know me thus, but rather this spiritual life is lived for the sake of restraint, abandoning, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination. So here you can see that the Buddha is not teaching to ordain in order to get this gain, honor, and praise. He's teaching that people should be interested in this spiritual life, in this path to enlightenment, in order to train the mind to eliminate those strong feelings, to eliminate discontentedness. That's the ultimate goal. During the lifetime of the Buddha, people ordained just solely for the sake of attaining enlightenment and progressing towards that goal. Nowadays, people have various influences of why they might choose to ordain. Some people are ordaining in order to get away from poverty, or to get an education, or to get this gain, honor, and praise, or for any number of other reasons that they might be choosing to ordain. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, in the way that I see ordaining, it should be for just one sole purpose, which is to get to enlightenment. And then having done so, if an individual chooses to share the teachings that it takes to get to enlightenment, this would be very beneficial to many people in the world. So for all those ordained practitioners, you might decide to start learning with the words of the Buddha, where you can see that he never taught to be disrespectful to people, but instead he taught to respect all individuals, especially those that are providing you support. That would be very wise to decide to practice in that way. So now going back to our list of misunderstandings, now that we've talked about this topic of ordained practitioners that I also include in the book, let's talk about number 5, which is chanting and mantras. This is something that you will see as a misunderstanding in the world as well. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he used chanting as a way to help his students commit his teachings to memory, because all of his teachings were oral. So when he taught, students would attempt to remember his teachings. And some people would remember some parts, some students would remember other parts. But every 2 weeks, his students would come together and they would chant his teachings word for word as a way to commit them to memory. So that then by the time he died, it was very easy for them to sit down, not super easy, but it was straightforward for them to sit down and document what it was that they've been chanting for all those years. Well, nowadays, a lot of these chants are in languages that people don't understand. They don't understand what the words are, what they're actually chanting, and so forth. So oftentimes when you don't understand something, it becomes kind of mystical and magical. So there's people who will tell you that there's certain chants or certain mantras that lead to an extra long life, or more money, or more wealth, or you'll get your boyfriend or girlfriend back. Or if you chant this chant for, 100 times every day for the next 10 years, you'll get to enlightenment. Or you'll eliminate your unwholesome karma if you chant this particular chant. Well, if you're being taught this is not what the Buddha taught. During the lifetime of the Buddha, chanting was only used to be able to commit his teachings to memory because it was an oral tradition and people needed that help. But today you can go into various communities and someone might tell you to chant a particular chant and you'll get this extra long life. Well, if somebody's sharing this with you, you should be able to independently verify this, because you're being taught to not believe anything whatsoever, but to learn, reflect, and practice. So if somebody shares that with you, that this is a special chant that only their temple knows, or only, these few people know, and if you chant this chant, you'll get this extra long life. Well, you should be able to look around in that community and see a bunch of people that are 150, 200, 300 years old because they've been chanting this chant for a period of time, and now there's all these older people that are around. But I guarantee you that you won't see that. If there was something like that you could chant and get this extra long life, or you could chant and get instantly rich or wealthy, or you could get to enlightenment really quickly, then those chants would have already made their way throughout the entire human population, because it's been 2,500 years since the Buddha lived. And if there was really, truly something like that, it would have spread like wildfire, because people would have, discovered that this thing works, and then they would have spread it all throughout the world. But this isn't true. And you can independently verify it by when somebody says, okay, chant this and you'll get wealthy, you can see that it actually doesn't work. Or chant this and your boyfriend or girlfriend will come back to you, or your husband or wife will come back to you. Well, the reason why things happen in our life is because of cause and effect, or action and result. When we make decisions, either wise, which will produce wholesome results, or unwise, which will produce unwholesome results. That's what's actually leading to any beneficial results or any things that we experience in life is based on our own decisions. And if we base our decisions in wisdom, we'll experience wholesome results. Where when we lack wisdom, we will experience unwholesome results. So it's not a matter of whether you chant or have mantras of what's going to happen. You can chant and do mantras all day long, but if you go out into the world to your occupation, into your work environment, and you have harsh language and you're aggressive and hostile and you lie and you do all these other things, it doesn't matter how much you're chanting, this isn't going to happen for you. So the chanting itself that I teach, it's not a rite or ritual ceremony. It's a way to ease the mind into meditation. You're not worshiping anybody when you're doing chanting. You're helping the mind to ease into meditation and ease out of meditation so that you can get more benefit out of the meditation itself. So you'll see people talking about these things and sharing these things in books and temples and Facebook groups and things like this all over the world. But it's important for you to be able to independently see the truth for yourself of what's truly leading to any kind of results in your life. And it's your decisions, either wise or unwise, that are going to lead to either wholesome or unwholesome results. And then the sixth one that I share in this book, in this particular chapter, is about the statues of Gotama Buddha. You'll see statues all throughout the world about Gotama Buddha, and I think these are very beautiful. There's lots of artists that put time into creating these statues, and it's amazing what people can actually create. They're absolutely beautiful. But the Buddha himself didn't teach anybody to make statues of him. So it wasn't until about 200 or 300 years after his death that people started making statues of him. And by the time people started doing that, they hadn't even lived during the lifetime of the Buddha, so they didn't even know what he looked like. So by the time people started making statues of the Buddha, it was during a time when they hadn't lived with the Buddha, and they may not have even looked in the original source teachings to know what the Buddha looked like, because in his actual teachings in the Pali Canon, there's a description of him describing himself and what he actually looked like. But 200 to 300 years after the death of the Buddha, the people who were learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha came in contact with the people in Greece. And the people in Greece were making statues of their gods because they believed in multiple gods. So the Greek people were already perfecting this art form of producing statues. So the people who had been learning the teachings of the Buddha were like, who do we have to make a statue out of? Oh, let's make a statue out of Gotama Buddha. So people made all different types of renditions of what the Buddha thought to have been looked like. But these people didn't actually live during his lifetime. And a lot of people put a crown on his head as if he was like a king or he was above people or something like this. But he actually didn't walk around with a crown on top of his head. He walked around with simple robes and he shaved his head. He looked like a human being. He didn't walk around with a crown on his head. At one time, he was a member of a royal family. He was a prince destined to become a king. And I imagine during that time, he might have had a crown on his head. But by the time he left the royal family and became a practitioner who was getting to enlightenment and ultimately a Buddha, he wouldn't have walked around with a crown on top of his head. So these statues that we see today, the vast majority of them don't even represent what the Buddha looked like. In fact, if you're in Japan, the statue might look very Japanese, or if you're in China, the statue might look very Chinese and have facial features and characteristics of a Chinese individual. Here in Thailand, some people say that the statues look somewhat Thai, but in reality, this individual originated in an area that we call Nepal. He was born in that region of the world, and he taught in Northeast India. Of course, India and Nepal didn't exist during his lifetime, but that region of the world, that ethnicity is where he came from. And this picture that I use, that you'll see in all the different places that I use an image of Gotama Buddha, this is what he is reported to have looked like, because this artwork was commissioned by an artist, or was commissioned to an artist here in Thailand. And this artist looked at the description of what the Buddha looked like in the Pali Canon, and then he made this image based on what it looked like from reading the teachings of the Buddha. And you can see that this particular image, he doesn't look Thai. He looks like an individual from Nepal or Northeast India. So I have confidence for that reason and some other reasons that this particular image is in fact what Gautama Buddha looked like during his lifetime. And while you'll see different statues and different representations of him in lots of different ways, it's important to understand that he didn't walk around with a crown on his head. Some people take this whole aspect of statues even further. They believe that the spirit of the Buddha is in these statues, and people will pray to these statues. They will feed these statues food or water. They even get maybe really angry if you point to the statue or you point your feet towards the statue. There's certain cultural customs around these statues because some people treat the statue as if it's actually Gautama Buddha himself. I actually did this at one time myself. When I would transport Buddha statues from one place to another, I would put the statue in the front seat of the car with me and put a seatbelt on the statue. I used to do all these different kinds of things. That's how I know these things aren't the truth, because I did them at one time. So you might be in various venues where people are feeding the statues, making offerings, praying, asking for certain things from these statues. But it's important that you understand that the Buddha didn't teach this, and don't be confused by this. And also, if you see people that are practicing some of these things that we're talking about today, you shouldn't judge them. You shouldn't look down on them. You shouldn't think that they're bad people or anything like this, because we're all at different places in our journey to enlightenment. And as you heard, at one time, I used to do all these different things, right? I used to have many, many Buddha statues. I used to think that chanting had some mystical or magical thing. I used to walk around with arrogance as well, and being boastful, right, and prideful. And also I did the Guatnam, the Namon, the Saisen, and all these different things as well. So you'll see different people that are in different stages of their development, and they may not be studying with the original words of the Buddha. You're choosing to learn with the original words of the Buddha and a teacher who bases their teachings in the original words of the Buddha. So you're learning these things. But unfortunately, other people may not be. So when you see people are perhaps involved in these things, it's important not to judge them or look down upon them. Maintain your humbleness and just have compassion, which is concern for their misfortune, and have loving kindness, which is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. But just understand that these things are out there, and others as well. So let me see if you guys have any questions on any of these three that we've been talking about here. Remember, you can do that through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So Max has a question here in Zoom. He says, I remember when I was following Zen Buddhism that the ash burned from incense was considered holy. Yes, this is another rite, ritual, ceremony, and worship that people might think of those kinds of things. But it's important to remember that there's nothing external that is going to create inner change, because all the work that you're doing is inside the mind. It's to be able to train the mind to heal from what hurt you so that you never need to hurt again. So if there's ever a time where there's something external, where someone's saying, oh, you have to have this string, or you have to have this water sprinkled on you, or these ashes or incense, or you have to have a special candle, or you have to buy these special clothes, or, you know, all these different things that are happening external, it's important to see that there's nothing external that's going to create inner change. Now, if you have a book, if you have a class, if you come to the temple, these are things that you're going to use in order to learn the teachings of the Buddha. But all the activity that is being done in order to train the mind to get to enlightenment is being done internal, inside the mind. And that's how you ultimately get to enlightenment. So when you start seeing these external things that are being talked about as being important to get to enlightenment, then you understand that these aren't what the Buddha taught. And when you see rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, then you know that as well. It looks like Joe has his hand up. So Joe, if you'd like to go ahead with your question.
Hi, Teacher David. My question is, I guess I just find it odd that, you know, it took so long to write the teachings down. If it was, you know, if they were obviously were helping a large number of people improve their lives. I don't know. It seems weird that I'm sure you have gone over this and the reason for it. Maybe I just need a refresher. But just talking about the statues reminded me that, you know, I forget how many years later they decided to sort of create the Pali Canon or write what they remembered of his teachings down for other people. And the same with the statues, I guess. Maybe they just didn't know about them. But, why did they wait so long, I wonder? That's my question.
Sure, I can definitely help you with that. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, he taught for 45 years, and the language that he taught in was the Pali language. And when he taught everything orally. And this was a language that he was using that was the common language that was spoken amongst the common individual. Because when he was in the royal family, they were speaking the royal language. But then when he stepped out of the royal family to share teachings, he spoke in the common language that the vast majority of the people around him would be able to understand, because not everybody understood the royal language. So now that he spoke in this common language, he then just spoke orally. And during that lifetime, the technology to write things down had not yet made it to that region of the world. In China, they were writing things down by that time frame. But during his lifetime, the technology to actually capture things in written form didn't exist. And the language that he was speaking at the time didn't have a script that could even be written down, because the technology didn't exist to write things down, that they also didn't invent a script that could then be used to actually write things down, because they didn't have a purpose for a script, because there was no technology to write things down. So it wasn't until after his death that about 3 months to 6 months after his death, they had what's called the First Buddhist Council, where 500 enlightened beings come together. And there were countless enlightened beings during the lifetime of the Buddha. So about 500 of those enlightened beings came together in order to document and start discussing how to capture his teachings. And then ultimately they end up writing them down. There's not a clear direction of exactly when they wrote them down. Was it, those 3 to 6 months after he died, or was it 200 or 300 years later? But I suspect it was those original individuals, because you see Ananda showing up a lot. You see Sariputta showing up a lot. You see a lot of these different individuals that are writing, or I should say that the teachings that we are reading are capturing what transpired in utter detail. And I can share with you that the Pali Canon, the portions that we have are accurate, that what the Buddha shared during his lifetime and what you can learn and practice today will lead to your enlightenment. But the main reason why these weren't captured during the lifetime of the Buddha, even though they were helping so many people, is because it was only an oral language. There was no script, and there wasn't the technology to capture the teachings after or during the lifetime of the Buddha. It wasn't until after his death that was then available to people. Okay, so we have another question coming in here from Kimberly. Kimberly saying, I struggle with not wanting some kind of symbolism. Being a Westerner growing up in the Christian beliefs where most people wear a cross necklace or carry a rosary, I realize it's not what the Buddha taught, but is it all right if I find peace with some sort of symbolism with me, such as having a small statue near the area where I meditate, or is this an attachment issue I need to work on? So it can be both. It really depends, Kimberly. So at one time, I owned probably 8, 9, 10 different Buddha statues, and I even had these little amulets that you wear around the neck. This is very popular here in Thailand. I probably had a good 20 or 30 of those. I've given all that stuff away and sent it to other places to ensure the mind wasn't attached to it. But during the time that I did have those things, they were nice reminders for me that when I was in the presence of these statues or having these amulets, it would remind me, to practice right speech or to meditate or things like this. So if you need these kinds of things in order to remind you to practice, then go for it. That's your personal choice. But also be observant of the mind of whether there's an attachment to these things. And the way that you can discern this is, say if you had these various statues and somebody broke in and actually stole them. would you be upset? Would you be angry? Would you be disappointed that they're no longer there? If so, then there's an attachment there. So you can actually have a possession without being attached to it. It's not the object itself that is the attachment. So if you would like to have a statue or an amulet or wear one of these things, you're more than welcome to do that. It's always your personal choice. I'm not here to tell a student what they should do or shouldn't do, but more to advise you as an advisor or as a guide to help you understand that this statue, this amulet, if you wear some kind of necklace or something like this isn't going to produce enlightenment for you. This isn't going to do anything like that. There's no spirit of the Buddha there. But if you're using it for a reminder of the teachings and to help you to remember to meditate and these kinds of things, then excellent. Use that for whatever period of time you need. And then at some point you might decide that you no longer need it, or you might still have these things and have trained the mind to not be attached to them, and then you still just have them around because they're beautiful perhaps. So like at the temple where I teach, I have a big picture of the Buddha. It's enormous. This same image that you see me using, I have it framed and it's enormous and it's large. But if that fell down and broke, or if somebody came and stole it, or as it withers away, I'm not going to be upset because I already know that it's impermanent. So it's not about the objects that you have. It's about training your mind to not be attached to them so that you don't allow the mind to experience discontentedness when impermanence occurs, because whatever you end up getting, it is impermanent. It's either going to fall apart, it's going to break, it's going to get stolen, or something's going to happen. You're going to misplace this thing. So you would like to just keep that in mind as you might decide to acquire a statue or a necklace or some kind of symbolism that reminds yourself to not get attached to it, that it's impermanent. And if these things disappear tomorrow, you'd be completely fine with that. Okay, I'm just going to look here in other places of our social media. I don't see any questions anywhere else. And you're welcome, Max and Joe and Kimberly. I see you guys being very respectful and thanking me for answering your questions. Thank you guys for asking these questions. This is a great way to clarify the teachings and learn more. So let's look at the last three for today's class that will help you to understand some misunderstandings about what you'll see in the world related to Gotama Buddha's teachings. Number 7 in the book is about where some people consider a Gotama Buddha to be a god, an avatar, or a lord. It's important to understand that the Buddha never referred to himself as a god, an avatar, or a lord, but you will see some people in the world referring to him in that way today. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he referred to himself as the Tathagata. This is the term that you'll see most frequently used in reference to the Buddha when he's talking about himself. He refers to himself as the Tathagata. We think that this word translates mostly to one who has discovered the truth, or one who shares the truth. That's what the word Tathagata means, one who shares the truth, or one who has discovered the truth. He very rarely referred to himself as a Buddha, but during his lifetime, people would often refer to him as Master Teacher Gotama, or Teacher Gotama, or Aesthetic Gotama, which basically means Monk Gotama. Some people even refer to him as Friend Gotama, right? There was all these different ways. There wasn't just one fixed way of referring to him, because that would be permanence. But nowadays, people have gotten to the point where some people consider him a god or an avatar. What an avatar is a reincarnation of a divine teacher from the past. And this is oftentimes thought about in Hindu teachings. And then some people refer to the Buddha as Lord Buddha. And I suggest in this particular chapter that it would be unwise for us to refer to the Buddha as God, an avatar, or a Lord for various reasons. The main reason is the Buddha never referred to himself as these things. So why would we refer to him as a God, avatar, or Lord? But also in various traditions, like in the Christian tradition, they think of Jesus Christ as being the only Lord and Savior. So if we refer to Gotama Buddha or any Buddha as a Lord, then with people thinking that Jesus Christ is the only Lord and Savior, they're going to immediately reject the teachings of the Buddha, when in reality, those people in the Christian community could actually be learning the teachings of the Buddha, because there is no rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship. And the Buddha is not a Lord. He's not considered to be a savior or a messiah or anything like that. So people that are in the Christian community, a lot of them do learn with me. I would say the vast majority of the people who do learn with me are from a previous background of either Christian or Muslim. And then, of course, there's some people who are Buddhist that have been Buddhist before, and they learn with me as well. But if we use this word Lord in representation of the Buddha, which some people will say Lord Buddha, then those people who are in the Christian community are immediately going to reject anything related to the Buddha because they consider Jesus Christ to be the only Lord and Savior. If you look up the definition of the word Lord, as a noun, it's described as someone or something having power, authority, or influence, a master or ruler. Or as a verb, it's to act in a superior or domineering manner towards someone else. Well, if you understand the teachings of the Buddha and what you've been learning over the last 6.5 months, this is exactly the opposite of what the Buddha taught. He didn't teach that he had power or authority or influence over somebody. He didn't teach that he's a master or a ruler. He wasn't superior or domineering towards people. Instead, he was practicing being humble and down to earth and being just like everybody else, living a life as a homeless, roaming ascetic who lived off of the donations of the people who supported him and that were learning from him as a teacher. So if we use this word Lord, not only does it drive away people who could otherwise benefit from his teachings, but it exactly is the opposite of what the Buddha taught in terms of how he shared his teachings in the world. He didn't teach that he had authority or power, influence, or that he was superior or domineering. Instead, he considered himself to be just like everybody else in the world. And that was really wise for us to think about ourselves in that way as well, that even though maybe there's other people who consider themselves above us or below us, or maybe there's certain roles or certain jobs in society that people consider to be higher or lower, it's important for us to think of ourselves as being all the same, that we're all equal. As soon as your mind wants to put yourself above or below others, this is that conceit coming in, which is what you would like to actually eliminate and get rid of. So we can use the example of Gotama Buddha, that he just considered himself to be the same as everybody else. And then you might hear people refer to certain aspects of the teachings of the Buddha as blessings. Some people might say, may the Lord Buddha bless you, or may the triple gem bless you, or may you be blessed by the Lord Buddha. This isn't something that the Buddha taught. If you look at what the word blessing means, is when you look it up, it means God's favor and protection, a prayer asking for God's favor and protection. So there's nothing in the teachings of the Buddha where he's blessing people or that he suggests that you could be blessed or that you could bless somebody else. If you think about it, a human being thinking that they can bless another human being, this means that you have the power to do something to another human being that's going to instantly protect them. Well, the thing that's going to protect you in life is your wisdom and your wise decision making. If you make unwise decisions, that's what's going to lead to your unwholesome results. So if you're looking for protection, the best way to be protected is to cultivate wisdom and make wise decisions, because as long as you're not putting harm out into the world, harm won't come back to you. So if you can learn and cultivate the mind and practice making wise decisions through wisdom, this is the ultimate protection. There's nothing that another human being can do to another human being by laying your hands on them or saying any kind of prayer or any kind of inclination or any kind of incarnation or any type of inciting anything that's going to then produce this protection for another person. So if we think about what the Buddha taught and you look at his teachings very closely, you can see that he never talked about any kind of blessings and he never went around and blessed people. And it would be one's own ego or arrogance or conceit to think that a human being can bless another human being. So it's important that you realize that this isn't part of the teachings of the Buddha, and it's not part of what would actually lead to one's enlightenment if they thought that they could be blessed by another individual and that's going to provide them protection. This would be part of wrong view. Where if you understand right view, where you're working to train your own mind and eliminate the pollutions of mind, namely eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance, then this will help you to understand that something like a blessing isn't going to produce any kind of beneficial result. And then lastly, before I open up to any final questions that you guys might have, about these misunderstandings or any misunderstandings or anything that you've heard in the Buddhist world that you would like to check whether it is a misunderstanding or not, let me share this last one, which is a really big misunderstanding in the world that you don't really see in the Theravada tradition, but you see in a lot of these other traditions. Is some people will tell you that you are a Buddha, or that you have Buddhahood, or that you have Buddha nature. This isn't something that the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that a Buddha is very rare in the world, that it's not very common that a Buddha would arise in the world. The last Buddha that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago, and that was Gotama Buddha. And there hasn't been a Buddha that the world is currently aware of, the entire world is currently aware of at this particular point. So if one considers themselves a Buddha or having Buddhahood or having Buddha nature, this is coming from one's own ego or conceit or having a misunderstanding of what a Buddha actually is. What a Buddha is an individual who gets to enlightenment without the help of any teachers or any guides. They independently get to enlightenment based on their own decisions and their own wisdom that they cultivate in their mind, and they don't need a teacher to be able to help them to get to enlightenment. And then once they attain enlightenment through their own independent journey, they then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people during their lifetime. And now countless people get to enlightenment during that individual's lifetime based on those independently discovered teachings that they share into the world. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So these are the three main criteria of what make a Buddha a Buddha. They independently get to enlightenment. They then share those teachings for the rest of their life, helping countless people get to enlightenment. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So while you can get to enlightenment and you would be an enlightened being or an arahant at that point, you wouldn't be considered a Buddha. The Buddha himself never taught that everybody is a Buddha. He taught that one can attain enlightenment, or they can attain this fourth stage of enlightenment called arahant, but he never described that everybody who gets to enlightenment is a Buddha, or that they have Buddhahood, or that one has Buddha nature. So this is a misunderstanding that you will see in the world. And you can see the words of the Buddha that will help you to understand that this is the truth of what I'm sharing with you. You can see here in this particular teaching, which is titled The Rare Appearance of Five Treasures, where the Buddha describes that a perfectly enlightened one, a Buddha, is very rare in the world. Here he says to one of his students, the appearance of five treasures is rare in the world. What five? 1. The appearance of a Tathagata, an arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, is rare in the world. It doesn't get more clear than that. If every single person was a Buddha, if every single person has Buddhahood, if every single person has Buddha nature, then this wouldn't be rare. It wouldn't be rare for a perfectly enlightened one to arise in the world. So he says it very clear here in number 1. And now, since we're looking and exploring this teaching, let's just go ahead and look at all the rest of these rare occurrences that the Buddha describes in the world as well. He says, number 2, a person who can teach the teachings and discipline proclaimed by a Tathagata is rare in the world. 3, when the teachings and discipline proclaimed by a Tathagata has been taught, a person who can understand it is rare in the world. 4, when the teachings and discipline proclaimed by a Tathagata has been taught, a person who can understand it and practice in accordance with the teachings is rare in the world. And then 5, a grateful and thankful person is rare in the world. And then he says this to his students, that this is the appearance of these 5 treasures is rare in the world. And this is from Gotama Buddha directly. So you can see that not everybody is a Buddha, or else the Buddha would have said that in his teachings, and he doesn't say that. So it's not until 2,500 years later now that over the course of history, people's minds have gotten to the point where they're not studying these teachings very closely, and now people are coming up with the idea that they're a Buddha, or that they have Buddhahood, or they have Buddha nature. And this is just a misunderstanding. And again, if people are sharing this, they're not a bad person. They haven't done anything wrong. It's just unfortunate that this has been shared with them. When they understand what a true Buddha is, which Gotama Buddha was a true Buddha, meeting those 3 criteria, then you can see very clearly that you're not a Buddha, because you're going to need help. You're going to need teachers. You're going to need guides to help you to get to enlightenment. So that right there, you don't meet the first criteria. And then when you get to enlightenment, you may decide to share these teachings, you may not. You might decide to be a business owner, or a construction worker, or an insurance adjuster, or a machinist, or a welder, or a taxi driver, or a restaurant owner, or a stay-at-home mom, or a stay-at-home dad, or a politician, or some other thing. Some people that get to enlightenment will choose to teach, but not everybody will. So an individual who gets to enlightenment isn't a Buddha. They're an enlightened being or an arahant, but it's very rare for these 3 criteria to exist in the world. And the last one that the world is currently aware of was over 2,500 years ago. So if you guys have any questions on any of these that I've discussed today, or anything else that you're seeing or hearing or aware of in the world related to the teachings of the Buddha and the path to enlightenment, you can ask those questions. You can put them into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions that you like. Looks like Max has a question here. He says, I'm afraid I have been conceited that I'm right and others are wrong, and I am judgmental about wrong beliefs or others. My in-laws are very religious and tend to be very pushy with their beliefs on others, including me, which drives our relationship apart. What can I do to improve my practice on this matter? So the first thing you would like to do is to eliminate any craving, desire, attachment, Max, that you have for your in-laws to be a certain way. Their mind has learned certain things. They've understood things in a certain way. So rather than having craving for them to be any different, just understand that they're struggling with craving, anger, and ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality. Those 10 fetters are in their mind, and they're struggling with that. So instead of feeling like you want them to be a certain way, or feeling that you need to be driven away from them, just understand that this is the condition of their mind. This is what they're choosing to practice. This is what they've been exposed to. And in their mind, they might really truly believe that the way to be loving and kind to you is to try to get you to practice the same things that they're practicing. And they might be pushing and forcing this on you. Well, when this occurs, all you need to do is, just politely, get up and walk away, or say, we've talked about this before, no, thank you. I appreciate your kindness, and sit there and change the subject. Or you can just change the subject if you like, or just, like I mentioned, get up and walk away. But don't have the craving or desire that they should be different than they are, that their mind has experienced what they've experienced, and I'm sure they have good intentions behind it, but they just don't understand what they don't understand. So if you can arise loving kindness, which is a genuine interest in seeing them be well, if you can arise compassion, which is concern for their misfortune, and understand that they may not ever stop forcing this, right? Because if they have that craving in there, they may not ever eliminate it. One of the ways to eliminate it is to fulfill it. So the more that they push and they push and they push, and they see that people get up and walk away, or they change the discussion, or they say, hey, we've talked about this before, let's talk about something else. If they see this occurring readily, they may at some point in the future decide to stop doing this, but you can't decide that for them. They have to decide it for themselves. They may go all the way to the end of their life, and they may be on their deathbed and still pushing you to try to convert to what it is that they're actually practicing. And you can just smile, you can just be understanding that this is their way of showing loving kindness and compassion, and they just don't understand what they don't understand. So if you eliminate your craving, desire, attachment for them to be any particular way, you can then reside peaceful and joyful with them regardless of what they think. That you understand, because of impermanence, not everybody is going to be learning and practicing these teachings that you are. They're going to have different views and different opinions and different beliefs, and that's okay. And this is a topic that you're not going to come to their side, and they're not necessarily going to understand what you're practicing. So it's best to not even talk about the topic. So whenever it comes up, just change the topic, or let them know that you politely would like to talk about something else, or just get up and walk away, go to the bathroom, wash your hands, do something else for 5-10 minutes. And maybe by the time you come back to the conversation, that the conversation has changed topics. And this would be, in my opinion, the best way to handle something like this. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. All I'm seeing is thank yous from Max and others. You're welcome. Pleased to share these teachings with you guys. So this is the end of our class for today. Next week on Sunday, we're going to be in the final aspect of the book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. Even though this is the last chapter, chapter 24, there's some content, some additional content at the end of the book that I titled Frequently Asked Questions, and there's some even content beyond that as well. So next week's class, we're going to be discussing the frequently asked questions that students will typically ask, and I have those in the book, and I will be sharing them in class as well. And then our last Sunday class, which is 2 weeks from now, before we restart the program from the beginning, it's going to be titled The 5 Hindrances and the 7 Factors of Enlightenment. This is where you're going to learn the 5 things that are going to be obstacles and hinder you from getting to enlightenment. Because now that I've spent 6.5 months helping you to learn what it takes to get to enlightenment, I'm going to share with you in our last class the obstacles or the hindrances of what's going to block you from getting to enlightenment, because you'll need to know what those are, and you'll need to know how to overcome them, because as you encounter those things, you're going to need to know what the solutions are. So I'm going to explain to you what they are so that you can see them arising in your mind, and then you know how to antidote them and how to fix them through the 7 factors of enlightenment and some other teachings. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation together. So you guys are welcome to join for that if you like. And of course, we have the Saturday class, the Pali Canon and English study group happening each Saturday. So you guys are always welcome to join that as well. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you all for your dedication and diligence for learning. Thank you to those of you guys that attend live, and even those that attend through the replay. We'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. Sawadee Kap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.